Far in this series, we've been looking at two-dimensional animation, the kind that, for example, I have here. So everything's moving about as though they're shapes on a surface. You could imagine them as being like having a sheet of glass, and you have shapes moving about on top of it, and then you have, of course, a background color sitting behind them. But we live in a three-dimensional world, so it seems reasonable to ask, would it be possible to have these shapes, rather than simply having them moving in 2 dimensions, whether we could have them moving in 3 dimensions instead, appearing to move away from us or towards us, or maybe to rotate in 3-dimensional space. And it turns out that in After Effects, this is indeed completely possible and relatively straightforward to do. So let's have a look. First of all, we'll come over to this diagram that I've got here in Adobe Illustrator and have a look at how, to begin with, 2-dimensional space is normally described. So this is possibly familiar to you from school, but we have these 2 different axes. We have an x-axis describing horizontal positions and a y-axis describing vertical positions. And each of our objects in After Effects indeed has coordinates that are in the x and y sort of plane, like that. If we have a look at this particular layer down here, we have a look at its position. We have its center point, its anchor point set to these coordinates. The first one is the x coordinate, the second one is the y coordinate. And its anchor point is represented by this little kind of crosshair-like motif right in the middle there. So that's halfway across this way, it's 960 pixels, and halfway up this way, 540 pixels. And those coordinates can in fact be negative, which would take them off the screen either to the left or down here to the bottom in the case of the y coordinate. All right, and if I want to animate that shape, let's say I want to make this sort of stripy shape animate here, I'd sort of set a keyframe, and I can actually change its x coordinate. I'm actually going to make that negative. Let's take it a little bit off screen. So we'll put in a value of, say, minus 300 as its x coordinate. You can see that it moves off screen there to the left. So if we come back to the start and hit play, see it sort of slowly moving off to the left there. Okay, so that's x and y coordinates. But if we want to think in terms of spatial depth, all right, we have to think about another coordinate. Okay, if we come back to our diagram here, we can import, in fact, put in another axis, and we call this one the z axis. So we have x, y, and z. That makes sense. So we have a 3-dimensional space, and any given object, when we're working in 3-dimensional space, is going to have 3 coordinates, 3 sets of numbers, one for x, one for y, and one for z, how far away it is in space from the picture plane. All right. So let's have a look at how we can actually do that. So I'm going to make this sort of stripy form here, make that start to act 3-dimensionally. And I'll do that for my other layers as well in due course. So first of all, I'm just going to make sure that I have that layer selected. You could do this with all of your layers at once if you wish. I'm going to just sort of select that layer there. I'm going to come up to the layer menu and choose this option, 3D layer. So that becomes 3-dimensional. Look at that. Suddenly it has this new widget appear here in the middle. Okay, and you can see the green one is the y-axis, the red one is the x-axis, and this blue one, which just looks like a dot here because it's directly front onto us, is the z-axis. We also see a little sort of representation down here of the way those coordinates are placed there. Okay, and if we open up the properties, go under transform, look at position, see it still has the X and Y coordinates. They're unchanged. But you see this third number here, a Z coordinate. So let's see what happens if we actually, let's go to the next keyframe. Let's change that value. Let's again drop that down into a different value. Let's put that, let's say about 350. I might just type that in. All right. So you see that now if I grab the current time indicator, this sort of playhead here, you might notice that it appears to be getting a little bit smaller there. It's not actually shrinking. There's no animation on the scale. It just appears smaller because of perspective. It's moving away from us. All right. So we can see that if we add a little bit of depth there, increase that number, a positive number moves that object away from us. Oops, let's make that 2000 rather than 200. See, that's now not just moving off to the left here, it is actually moving away from us in depth. And again, as I say, there's no animation on the scale there. It is genuinely moving really in 3 dimensions. All right. So this seems quite good. Let's have a look at what else we've got here. We also have down here some new properties. So X, Y, and Z rotation. And this one, which you can use as think of as a kind of a shorthand, orientation. So I'm just going to start to animate that orientation track. I'll start that off just flat on. I'm going to move to somewhere further in time over here. And on the orientation track, I'm going to set a keyframe. All right. So I've got these different axes. So these are numbers in degrees. So if X, Y, and Z. And I might have it, let's have it rotate on the X-axis. That seems like fun. So it's going to rotate as I increase that number. You see this? See, it starts to rotate like so. All right, so it's as though it's got an axle and it's rotating around that axle being the X-axis. And then again, you can see that that's a genuine 3D rotation. Those of you who've done some perspective before will recognize that those edges there are converging towards a vanishing point down here somewhere. It is genuinely a 3-dimensional motion. Okay. All right. A couple of other things that are worth noticing. I'm going to put in another copy of that object just because I think it's the stripes are quite good for working with 3-dimensional layers, 3D layers. I'm going to open this one up. I'm going to change its position. Let's start this one off 3000 pixels distant and a bit off to the side. So you can see that poking out there. That's it there. And I might change its Y position as well. Seems like fun. Let's put it up here a bit. Move it a little bit further away. Okay, so I might animate that as well. So again, setting a keyframe here in the position property, and I'm going to have it move yet further away, say 3000 pixels distant, maybe even a little bit more. Let's make it 5000. All right. So you can see that little bit of motion there. And I might change the orientation as well. Change its orientation just around the, coming here to this property. So change, this time I'm going to rotate it around the y-axis. So it's obviously the second number here. So yeah, x-axis, y-axis. You can see that as I increase that number down here, that we can see this rotating around there. So we have some genuine 3D motion here. I might actually just come back, set a keyframe at the start here, and set that number to 0 so we can see that animation take place. You can see that object rotating there as it recedes away from us. Alright, so that seems fine. So I can continue to build 3D layers. One thing that's worth noting though is that these layers, such as these, that I've not made 3D layers, remain fixed, as though they're fixed to the front of the camera, as though there's a sheet of glass attached to the camera and they're just moving around on that surface. They are not taking part in this three-dimensional space. All right, I can make that clearer by introducing a camera to this scene. Let's actually explicitly add a camera. So if I go to, again to the layer menu, go to new, and choose camera, brings up this camera settings dialog. All right, I'm going to set this to a 50mm lens, 50mm prime lens. It's the closest to, in terms of its optical properties, to the human eye. Of course, we have two eyes and the camera only has one, but that will do just fine. All right, I always like to put my camera layer as my first layer. It is possible to have multiple cameras. I recommend that until you get used to them, that you don't create more than one camera, that you only have one, at least per composition, just so things don't get confusing. All right. So the camera itself is possible to animate. We can animate this camera as well. So to open up its transform properties down here. Okay, give it a keyframe. Move somewhat further off in time. Let's go 10 seconds. That seems good. So it's just sort of moving slowly. And I'm just going to change the X value to begin with. Just sort of panning across the scene like this. And you can see how the perspective on these objects that I've made three-dimensional layers, how that changes. So we've got a panning shot now. But one thing you might notice is that these 2D shapes that I've not changed into 3D layers, the view on them is not affected by the movement of the camera. Alright, so let's just close up the camera's properties and let's unlock these other layers. I'm just going to shift click, so just held down the shift key while clicking on these other shapes, other layers shape layers rather. And I'm going to again go to the layer menu and choose this option, 3D layer. So they now suddenly are three-dimensional. See how they appear to move there? It's not that they're moving, it's more that they're kind of joining our 3D sort of party there. So if we now have a look at the animation, you can see that they are actually moving in that three-dimensional space with respect to the camera there. And even though they're all still operating on the same plane, they are nonetheless acting three-dimensionally. So there we have it, working in 3D. And you can take this to an extraordinary degree of complexity. And once you start moving the camera, you can start doing some real cinematography with After Effects. You can start doing the sort of panning and dollying shots. You can play around with camera lenses and depth of field. All of those possibilities are available to you.